We're live. It is 4/7/22. Taking up H 548, a miscellaneous cannabis establishment procedures bill. So Michelle Childs is here to walk us through the bill, and then hopefully we'll have time to hear from the Honorable James Pepper, Chair of the Board, and Gary Geigar from the Agency of Agriculture.
All right, so good morning.
Gary, sorry, I said Gary. Gary.
I'm sure he's very forgiving.
So for the record, Michelle Childs, Office of Legislative Counsel, and I'm gonna share my screen. Take a look at H 548. So this is, just like it says, miscellaneous cannabis procedure. So this is a little bit of a catch-all of things that primarily were requested by the board, been evolving over time. I'm sure James will can talk to you about the reasons why they've been asking for these changes. I'll give you a little bit of context as I walk through them, but I'll do it quickly. So starting on page 1, the first section, and this is giving the board the authority to regulate synthetic cannabinoids and hemp-derived cannabinoids. They wanted to be very clear in statute that they have that authority. It's not really contemplated in the original enabling legislation when you set up the board. It wasn't something that I recall us ever discussing. I'm sure Mr. Pepper can talk to you about the reasons why they would like the authority to regulate that.
Okay.
Section 2 is an amendment to the rulemaking for cannabis establishments, and you'll see in subdivision A1I with regard to the regulation of additives. They also want to be clear that that they can regulate cannabidiol derived from hemp. So that is something that I think, again, I think James can probably speak to in terms of the types of products and how folks are combining different products in the market.
This just gives them the ability to
do rulemaking. So page 2. Also with regard to rulemaking so right now there's a requirement that a single package for a cannabis product can't exceed 50 milligrams of THC. And there's some exemptions to that, the ones that aren't consumable, so like a topical cream, something like that. And this is adding, you'll see on II, solid concentrates, oils, or tinctures. Because those oftentimes are super concentrated in it.
Would this allow them to go up to anyone?
I think we're going to see that in a minute.
Section 3, identification cards.
Well, I wanted to go down. There's one more change on the rules. So rules concerning retailers, and so as you might remember this one. There's a current requirement that if the retailer sells both cannabis products and hemp products, that they be clearly labeled, but also displayed completely separately. And the board had asked that we eliminate the requirement that they be displayed separately. And again, I think my understanding is that oftentimes their products may be combined. So it might be there might be something that is from hemp that is combined with something with cannabis, and then that would be. But it does still require that they be clearly labeled. That they contain. So
could at some point you show us what E is, because it says requirements for opaque child resistant packaging.
Where are we?
I'm on
Page
D.
2, D.
D,
Oh, okay,
and then
yeah.
it says cannabis products at point of sale to customer and I don't know what the and is.
It's whatever.
well, oh right, that actually is a policy change. I'm sorry, that was a little, and I skipped right over it. Is changing it. So right now under current law, Cannabis, like flower cannabis, has to be in opaque child-resistant packaging, and the board asked that that requirement only apply to cannabis products, but not to flower.
Why? Okay.
But what is the and?
Well, right now, if you look at it, it says you have to requirements for opaque child-resistant packaging of cannabis and cannabis products. Now, under this, it would just be cannabis products.
So this and,
At point of sale and,
Oh my God,
if you look at D,
Yeah.
it ends with
They're
the
just
word
looking at
and.
the final.
Oh, you want
Wants
the
to know what
last
DE
one. Oh,
is.
okay,
what
Right.
is, what is and what?
We
Yeah.
haven't made any changes in that.
right, I just.
I understand, but it's kind of confusing, because I don't know what and.
Sure.
What
Oh,
the
I
heck is
will,
it?
I will look it up.
Yeah.
It might be E, I would assume.
It is E.
What is E?
It is E. I don't recall.
Okay, well, sometime
Sure,
when we come back to this week, we could take a look.
I'm sure as soon
What?
as I'm out of the witness chair, I can tell you. I'll look it up.
I just want to flag, I think moving away from child-resistant packaging before we open it is not a good idea. And
Well,
we'll-
let's hear why they
Yeah,
want to do
understood.
that. Because it's only for the flower, not for the products.
Well, okay.
Okay, so section 3, this is on the cannabis establishment identification cards. So you'll probably recall, so with the, how we've had the dispensary system operating, if you're working in a dispensary, you have to go through and you have to have the background check and DPS, and then now the board would issue you a card to be working at the particular establishment that you have applied for the card for. This is changing it so that the card wouldn't be tied to a specific employer, but would be granted generally by the board, and then would allow you to have a card for a certain amount of time. And it would just kind of vet you and say, you are free to work in this realm within cannabis establishments. And that's to avoid, as you can imagine, kind of like, so if somebody's working at one place and then they decide to move to another place, that they don't have to go through the background check again, get a whole new card, things like that, but that the Cannabis Control Board would have all that information on that person, and they could work anywhere in the industry as long as they had a valid card.
Is there a procedure for revoking the card?
There are procedures in existing law with regard to if you have violated any of the terms of, they have the ability to do that. So moving on to page 4, section 4. So you recall that under current law, folks can only get one of each type of license. And the board has asked that you change the policy around that with regard to testing laboratories. So thinking about, you're going to have a lot of people coming to market. Everybody's going to have to be testing, and the board is concerned, wants to make sure that there are plenty of testing labs that are available for licensees to be testing their products, and don't want to limit that. So if there is someone who would like to have multiple labs, then this would allow for that. Next change is section 5 on the retailer license, and I think this was just something, like an oversight, just we weren't thinking about it, was, you'll see on subdivision A2, this would just allow a retailer to package. So if they are purchasing flower from a cultivator or from a wholesaler, but they want to package it in their own shop, package, that they could do that, as long as they're in compliance with the packaging rules.
All right.
Page 5, section 5. This is not changing anything substantively. It is kind of what we often refer to as like belts and suspenders. There is something in current law in section 908 subsection F that says that an integrated licensee is required to have their products tested independently. So if it's an integrated licensee and they grow and they test and they sell, but they can't satisfy the testing requirements by testing their own. They have to have it done by an outside lab. So again, that's in current law, but people kept missing it for whatever reason, so we're putting it in twice. And then Philip is right, section 7, this is that one provision that was in H505 that we just talked about, so that one is there.
So we only have to pull one of those things out.
Correct. Section 8, again, this is something I think just was an oversight when we were doing Act 164. So we recall that what you did in order to gear up for the market, you allowed the caps for the dispensaries, those to lift so that they could start sharing supply with integrated licensees in order to get things to market before the fall. But it's only for a certain time period until you have the retail stores open. And so this is just putting that end date, October 2022 in there. I think that was what was intended. We just didn't put the backstop date on there. And that's the date when the retailers will be online. And that's it.
Can I tell you that when Putney had its informational meeting on, and we had that on the ballot for town meeting. And when we had the information meeting, we have a winery in Putney. And she said, oh, I do support this. And she said, I always wanted to be able to say we were the Putney Winery and Pottery.
I remember years ago, you gave me a nice little bottle of like ice wine or something.
Maybe, I don't know whether you can answer the question or Pepper is the better person to answer it, but I've had a number of emails from people about the packaging and the warning on the package, particularly from not medical society. And I don't see that in this bill.
No, you know, it
And
is.
the other is about something about the caps on hemp and
The caps on THC.
THC or whatever it is. So those have been the bulk of my emails about the bill, but they're not in the bill.
Right.
Let me jump in on the warning label. Elcar is sending you an official letter. When we went through investigating how to legalize, we were always touting Colorado. We're going to take all what they've done, make sure we do the right things that they did wrong, et cetera, et cetera. After James Pepper and Company passed their warning label, Colorado changed its warning label. So Elcar heard that information and said, probably ought to take a look at the committees of jurisdiction just to see if it's a discussion that should be had. And it's really not anything more than that. You're getting the letters from all the people who are in favor of Colorado's change. And so since we relied very heavily on Colorado with all of our conversations about trying to get this passed in the first place, once we found out they had changed their label, and did so for a reason, we just don't know why.
The second one I don't quite understand is hemp growers, and we'll hear from them next week, I guess. And then the third one is the change in ownership of the dispensaries. And that is a concern to me. I opposed the integrated license from the beginning. That was something I made so darn many compromises. The Senate made so darn many compromises because the House was very stubborn and they knew, I don't think they cared if they had a bill or not. They used that. But I think we've got a mess on our hands with that one. And I want to look at that in this bill also. Because I just heard through the grapevine that, they've taken over 4 of the 5 dispensaries.
So,
They being the conglomerates from out of state, out of country too.
can I ask a question about the integrated license?
Yeah.
And maybe Pepper can answer this there are so many dispensaries right now, and they can have an integrated license. But we haven't ever given the ability to have more. Am I right about that?
Right.
So when Putney had it on their thing, if we wanted to allow integrated licenses, we can't have any more.
No,
Right.
the integrated licenses are only available to those folks who were a registered dispensary at the
Right,
time. So you can never have more than 5 integrated licenses in
Exactly.
there. the 5 limit dispensary, medical dispensary, that went away when the old statutes were repealed. So now there is not a cap on medical dispensaries, but there is a cap on
Integrated
yes, and
licenses.
it's only for those folks who own
So for
dispensaries
a moment in time.
for a moment in
Right.
time.
So even if Putney voted to allow integrated licenses, it's not gonna happen because they can't have any more, right?
Well, you
There's
could
only
have one
one.
operating in your town. They don't have to be wherever their medical dispensary is.
Well,
Right,
I think
okay,
Mr. Pepper
okay.
knows some of the issues that we also want to discuss besides the bill.
Can I, before we move on, just for a
Yeah.
second, just to address, so the first thing with regard to the labeling, I just want to point out, so that, I just want to be clear that the board you gave them clear authority to be doing the labeling. They were required to work with the Department of Health on the labeling, and the testimony from the board was that they basically just took the Department of Health's recommendations and used those for the rules with regard to labeling. And so some people didn't like that. They participated in the rule process and didn't like it, and so they were told to kind of come to you in terms of if you wanted to change statute with regard to what's required on the label. So that's the one issue. And then the second issue before integrated was, on the prohibited products, I think you had mentioned. That was something that was kind of the front and center piece of the bill as introduced as requested by the board, but the House chose not to include it in the final version. So that was stripped out. And then,
Why don't we hear from James Pepper, and hopefully James can say hi to our old friend Grin and David Sher, who we miss in this committee.
David Chair's working there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
general counsel.
He's the general counsel to the cannabis. Welcome, Mr. Pepper.
Thank you. For the record, it's James Pepper, the chair of the Cannabis Control Board. It is a real treat to be here, or virtually here. And I say that knowing full well that everyone was hoping for Bryn. But she is right now is more work than any one human can do. So I'm here as your consolation prize. I'm happy to just answer questions. I did have some kind of prepared remarks, but whatever seems like the easiest and most efficient for the committee. I was prepared to, for instance, give a update on the kind of picture of the market that's developing. It's coming into focus. Happy to kind of talk to you about the bill and why and how we came up with some of these provisions. Whatever is kind of the best for you, Mr. Chair, and for the committee.
Well, I think would love to hear, I don't hear any controversy other than the 3 that I already mentioned.
Why don't I start there then? With respect to the warning label that's required to appear on all packaging. Michelle is right. The law, Act 62 from last year said that it's the board is going to come up with the label, but we have to work in consultation with the Department of Health. And the Department of Health actually has to kind of report back to the legislature on how that collaboration went, just to make sure we didn't veer too far away from their recommendation. And so what we did was we created a public health subcommittee of our advisory committee. Dr. Levine was our designee to that from the Department of Health. We essentially outsourced this entire work to the Department of Health. They looked at every other state's warning label, all the 19 adult use states, all of the 37 medical use states. And they wanted to create somewhat of a regional standard so that people that might be traveling from Massachusetts or from Maine or New Hampshire could kind of get used to seeing the same symbol and the same warning sign. They did kind of create a Vermont spin to it a little bit, but essentially they went through a process, and then Dr. Levine sent it out. He took the warning label, sent it out to his constituents, his kind of stakeholders for a 2-week period, and finalized it. And we put it without changing a single kind of comma or period right into our rule. And that's the label that you see before you. Vermont Medical Society came to us after our, essentially after our rules had been finalized. I sent their warning label to the Department of Health and asked them if they wanted us to use that one instead of the one that they came up with. The Department of Health understandably was a little bit swamped and we're not kind of interested in making any last minute edits. And so they said, we'd prefer you just stick with the one that we vetted and the one that we proposed. So that's the plan. That's the one that we're going to use. I take the Medical Society's points that sometimes less is more on a warning label, that, sometimes it's easier to digest when there's fewer words. And I would say, what I would say to that is that we also have this point of sale flyer that we've been creating. And it's an informational flyer that every retailer is required to post and hand out to people that are purchasing cannabis at the retail shop. And we're happy to work with the Medical Society on what should go in that flyer. And honestly, when it comes to a warning label that's going to be relatively small, I think the point of sale flyer might be a better place for some of these concerns. But again, it's up to this committee. This committee can dictate essentially what that warning label says. All I would say on that is that we went through a pretty robust process to get to where we are. And
Can you get us a copy of the warning label?
Yeah, I'll send that to Peggy. It's in our rule number 2, section, I think, 1.11, but I'll send it to Peggy just so that you can see it, as well as the kind of contains THC symbol that also has to appear on all the products.
The flyer that's being developed would probably be a better place for warnings about potential suicide and other things that I saw from the Department of Health that they wanted on the warning.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Vermont Medical Society.
James, can I ask a question?
Sure.
James, I'm not sure that you were on the LCAR meetings that we were talking about this. David Scher was. And I had asked him point blank, did the decision about the warning label you guys are going to make, did that come before or after Colorado had changed its label? And he said that the decision came before, and I asked, has anybody contacted Colorado to simply say, why did you change your label? What did you find was necessary to do that? To date, I don't think anybody has, and I think we could short circuit the entire conversation by simply having somebody call and asking that question. It very well be you end up right back where we are now, but we this is like 6 years ago now, when I was on GovOps, we traveled the state touting to people. We were going to make sure we did not commit any of the mistakes that Colorado did. And we relied on that very heavily going around the state selling all of this. So now we found Colorado made a decision to change from what I understand is your current version label to something different. And I'd like to get to the bottom of why that change was made.
I'm happy to do that. And it's actually a relatively easy thing to do. I'm sorry it hasn't happened to date. We're part of a national regulators association that includes Colorado. So I can just email my counterpart over there and just ask how that decision came about. So I'll do
very
that.
helpful. There's a letter that came out of LCAR today to the committees of jurisdiction. And you might want to grab hold of that and just make sure we.
That's what I printed out. Maybe. This one here.
No, this is from Jim Dumont. LCAR is officially. LCAR's letter. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
This is it?
Is that the today? Because we only passed it out today.
Yep. So why don't we make copies of this?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
So the other concerns that I heard just in the walkthrough, one about in section 2, there's a concern that maybe concentrates can be above 60% THC. We had a very robust debate about this in the House GovOps committee. We heard a lot of testimony that, and again, this came from a recommendation. The board was required to make a recommendation as to whether we should allow solid concentrates above 60% THC. We heard from, a PhD MD from UVM, who's the former medical director of the Vermont Patients Alliance, that, and from doctors in Oregon and elsewhere, that at times solid concentrates, the things that you're adding into them to decrease their potency down to 60% can be very dangerous and almost worse than the 60% plus product. The House ultimately decided that was kind of a bridge too far for them to remove prohibited concentrates with greater than 60% THC from the prohibited product list. And so really what this section does is it allows products to contain both THC and CBD, and it allows vape cartridges to contain more than 50 milligrams, because essentially a vape cartridge, the smallest one has more than 50 milligrams of THC in it. And so essentially what would we be doing is, if we didn't change this section, vape cartridges would have to be kind of only half full, and that didn't make sense to us. This wasn't really a controversial piece. We think that this was actually the original intent, because vape cartridges are permitted in this industry. It's really the solid concentrates that can't be above 60% THC. So this section just ensures that you're not actually inadvertently prohibiting vape cartridges from being part of the market.
So does the board support that section?
Yes, the board, all of these recommendations, all of these provisions have come from board recommendations. And I should say that, as we were drafting our rules, we came across a lot of issues, and we think that everything here is in line with the legislative intent. The one piece where we've kind of moved outside of what I truly believe is a technical amendment is on the child-resistant packaging for flour. And I'm happy to discuss that as well. And, Kerry Jaguar from the Agency of Agriculture, he runs the cannabis quality program, which oversees the hemp cultivators in this state. He's also a chemist, and he serves on our advisory committee as the designee from the the Agency of Agriculture secretary. And, he has led our advisory committee through some of the finer points about cultivation and the chemistry of cannabis. And we heard from him, and we also heard from people in the medical society and others that said, I shouldn't say the medical society, I should say the medical field, that consuming cannabis flower does not have a psychoactive effect. And that is really important to kind of note, that the purpose of child-resistant packaging is to ensure children under 5, because that's the federal definition of child-proof packaging, cannot access cannabis that might, lead to a hospitalization or something along those lines. And really the testimony that we heard is that you would have to eat an incredible amount of cannabis flower, just raw flower, in order for there to be any noticeable psychoactive effect in a child under 5. And so really what this means is that the need for child-resistant packaging has been carried through many states for flour, but that it really doesn't serve much of a function other than to create a lot, and I mean a horrendous amount of non-recyclable consumer waste, plastic in particular, because I think everyone's looked at, a medicine jar or a pill bottle, and it's all plastic, and that top is also a very hard non-recyclable plastic.
Gonna add that not only are they child resistant, they're senior citizen
Yes.
resistant too.
Yes.
Right.
Mr. Chair?
So, yes.
If I could ask Pepper, so I understand the point about it would take a great deal of flour to have a psychoactive effect. To me, that's not an argument against requiring the packaging. Because I think one of the things that we're trying in an overarching way to do is give people confidence in the state who lack it currently. And the place they lack it is the intersection between this industry and children. And so one of the, I don't know if you'd call it a compromise, but one of the ways in which this bill and this movement made its way through the building was to err on the side of protecting kids. So I'm thinking of at the stores in Massachusetts, they sell flour in an opaque white plastic top that is childproof. And to me, that just makes good sense. And I'm wondering, why not go forward with that? Why create two classes of packaging, one of which is not childproof, even if it doesn't lead to psychoactive effects? I think it continues the anxiety about unintentional spillage into people under a certain age.
I hear the concern, and honestly, this is purely a policy decision for this committee and the legislature writ large to make. The concern that we have, is not more than what I've laid out. Alcohol does not come in child-resistant packaging. That has an immediate psychoactive effect if consumed. Flour just doesn't do that. And, the plastic, the amount of consumer waste is really a huge problem. There's two aspects of this industry that really shook my faith in whether or not we should do this. And it wasn't the consumer protection stuff. It wasn't the, it really came down to controlled environment agriculture, which is indoor growing, and the carbon footprint that creates, and this packaging, this consumer waste issue. And really every state, I shouldn't say every state, but almost every state has said, if only we could get rid of child-resistant packaging, we would solve, take 50% of the amount of plastic that ends up in our landfills because of the cannabis industry would be gone overnight. And so really, what we intend to do is have a product registration process, which includes packaging. And we're going to look at tear resistance. We're going to look at, of course, opaque, that remains. And we're going to try to push Vermont towards glass and try to push Vermont towards metal and recyclable products and avoid plastic throughout the supply chain, but most specifically trying to get rid of unnecessary plastic. And this provision, because it's not actually adding to any sort of child safety, other than maybe a perception in someone's mind that it is, to me is an easy way for us to cut out a huge amount of plastic consumer waste overnight.
Well, I won't argue the point, but I will just say that, in a few months, we're going to open these stores. People are going to take the products home, and other people are going to view those products. And I think if everything that comes out is childproof for the rollout, I see that as a good thing. I think if we now at this point begin moving away from childproofing, we run the risk that people think that the products that come out are not protected for children. And so I hear you. I hear you on the, on the recycling side of it. I just don't know that that's my number one concern right now.
I think that those people who oppose it are going to continue to oppose it, whether it's childproof or not childproof. And those people who think it through, well, the people who oppose it are going to oppose it.
Well,
So
good.
Yeah,
Can we get on to the fourth issue, the integrated licenses?
Yes, absolutely. So this is, I
hate to say I told you so, but when we were writing the bill, I told you so.
yep, you did.
So on this issue, Senator, you're absolutely right. We've heard at the Cannabis Board that there might be some confusion in the industry about how these two provisions interact. The one provision meaning being that you wrote into the law that one entity, one business can only own one license type. So you can own, a cultivator license and a retail license, but you can't own two cultivator, you can't own two retail. You have to operate, each license has to be tied to a single location. And that applies to, just any prospective licensee. It also applies to the dispensaries. You're very clear in 901 D3B that a dispensary can get an integrated license, but they can't also then out and go get one of each type individually. So that was pretty clear. It's foundational, honestly, first in the country, foundational to our market. The confusion, I think, from the industry comes in when in the section where you created the integrated license or define the integrated license type. That's 7 VSA 909. You said that there shall be no more than 5, and that a dispensary in 5 integrated licenses, and that a dispensary in good standing as of April 1st, 2022 are entitled to them. So I think, by saying that there's 5 or there's no more than 5 and saying that, a dispensary in good standing has led to some confusion. And I say confusion because while there are 5 dispensary locations around the state, there are actually only 3 companies that own those 5. So 2 companies, Slang owns 2 locations, one in Burlington and one in Brattleboro, and Cureleaf owns 2 locations, one in Bennington and one in Montpelier. And so I think the one license rule to the board, I think, is fairly straightforward. But I think it might be helpful for this committee or for the legislature to really clarify the intent behind, especially that 909 section. Was it intended to allow, this one entity to own 2 integrated licenses, or was it not?
Well, I will say for myself, it was intended that they would only own one integrated license, not
Yes.
2 or 3.
Yes.
And my understanding of what's happened is out-of-state big money, which I can remember the first hearing we held at UVM. David Zuckerman, former lieutenant governor, candidate for lieutenant governor, had introduced a bill, and what we heard at that meeting was no big pot companies, and that was their concern about his bill. And it was so clear of what the people of the state wanted. They wanted small craft licenses and not big pot, whatever you want to call it. So that's why I opposed the integrated license to begin with. But now that we've had this situation where they bought out the 3 of the local owners, and the smallest one is still one in Brandon. Am I correct? That hasn't been bought out.
I think they actually all have been bought. No, Slang, as you mentioned, Cureleaf, and then Ianthus, they're all kind of these
I think we
multi-state
should make it
operators.
clear in this bill that there's only one. You only got one integrated license. You don't get 2 because you bought 2 companies.
How will we do that retroactively?
Well, we're clarifying language that was there.
No, I
I don't
understand,
think we
but
can make it
Okay.
retroactive, but we can make it.
if they've paid, let's say they paid $25 million and they acquired it, then do we set the state up for a lawsuit?
I think we can do it because we're just clarifying what we intended.
The way you say in 909 that there shall be no more than 5. You don't say that there shall be 5 and every entity in every satellite location shall be entitled to one. I think the kind of one license per entity rule, one license type, is very straightforward. I just have heard that there might be some confusion on this point, and I think that while we have the opportunity, or while you have the opportunity, I would flag it for you as a time where you could clarify just which if what the original intent between those two provisions is.
I think we should put something in this bill about that.
And I'll just jump in here is that, so Philip, I think what Pepper is talking about is the language. I think people can view it differently. And I think I can see how folks, sorry, I can't tell if it's better for me when I'm speaking out there. I can see how folks could read that differently, and there's, and so you guys clarify intent, you know, when people have, you know, once you pass something and folks come and say, well, does it mean this or does it mean that? And then if you come back to this body and you ask, you may get a lot of different answers. So it could have been that I thought one thing and other folks thought another thing. And so it's your prerogative to go back and to clarify, this is what we meant. And I think that's just what Dick is talking about.
Thank you. You just said that in such a good way.
Well, you said the same thing. I was
I
just.
know, but you said it in a way that people could understand.
I have one issue that is not.
I was slow as a child.
Don't believe it.
Judging from some of your Facebook comments.
That was-
I would say that's still going.
was
not
Dick, is it?
Yeah, right.
Go ahead. That's an inside the pity humor. Go ahead, Pepper, please. Mr. Pepper.
Yeah, I think as everyone understands with technical amendment bills that, you know, you tend to leave them open because issues do come up through the year. And we actually have had an issue arise more recently that, you know, occurred after this bill left the House. And it relates to fingerprinting. So I need to give a little bit of background on this issue. So please, I apologize in advance for that. But in order to, you know, this is a unique industry because of the federal status of cannabis. And in order to comply with, you know, what was the Cole memo and is now called the FinCEN guidance, which is essentially if you follow these 8 priorities, then the federal government will not prioritize Vermont for enforcement federally. And one of those priorities is ensuring that the participants in this industry aren't essentially front organizations for criminal enterprises or cartels or something along those lines. And so we're required, as are many agencies in the state, to do a 50-state fingerprint supported background check. And we have to work with VCIC to get them from the NCIC, the FBI. And then, you know, we review them and try and see if people have certain types of criminal convictions, but also civil and administrative adjudications. We were authorized to receive these fingerprints in the original enabling legislation in Act 164. We applied for this authorization to receive these fingerprints from the FBI. We applied for that authorization almost a year ago on April 27th, 2021. We have been kind of being a squeaky wheel at the FBI, wondering because our licensing window is so close to open, or our issuing of licenses is imminent, when we're going to get this authorization. And we have not heard from them. I think, you know, they're a little bit backlogged, which I can talk about, but also, you know, we heard very kind of preliminarily, very recently, that they intend to deny our authorization to receive these fingerprints. And the reason for the denial is that our statutory definitions of applicant and principal and owner and controller and employee, all the people that we need to collect fingerprints for, are not sufficiently specific for the FBI to feel comfortable releasing these fingerprints to us. Now I mentioned earlier, we're a member of this Regulators Association. It's all kind of 19 legal states, as well as all representatives from all 37 medical states. And this issue is coming up in every single new state, California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, New Mexico. Everyone is running into the same sort of problem with the FBI. And we had kind of a chain, an email chain going around about this, everyone kind of describing what their issues were and how they tried to deal with them. And some of the major themes are that some states have tried to modify their statutory definitions, and they've modeled them after states that have this authorization, like Colorado, like Oregon and Washington, states that are kind of more mature. And that has not been successful with the FBI. They've denied, even after states have modified. The FBI has indicated that they're going to reopen their decision to authorize some of these more mature states like Oregon. And unfortunately, the FBI is backlogged on this in the fingerprinting department. It's taking weeks and months to get responses to basic questions. So I would say we've developed an alternative plan at the board, but it's not it comes at a cost to the applicant, and it's not as comprehensive as kind of this biometric fingerprint supported 50-state check. I raised this because while, I think our alternative plan will still comply with the kind of federal guidance, the FinCEN guidance, and protect our industry. I think that we owe it to our potential licensees to try everything, to really build a record that we as a board have tried everything. And so our contact at the FBI did say that she would pre-authorize language if we could get her some language, and she gave us some indication of what might work, what might not. And so I think this bill, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen when we have to start issuing licenses. But I do think that it's worth it for the board to try to modify, get language around employee, around owner, around controller, around affiliate, more specific and hopefully compliant with what the FBI needs. And hopefully we can kind of set this industry up so that we're not running afoul of any sort of federal enforcement agencies. So I don't have the language with me today. We've alerted Michelle to this issue, and we're going to try and work with our contact at the FBI to get something that should work. But I just, because this bill seems to be the appropriate vehicle for something like that, I just wanted to flag it for this committee now.
Yeah, it's something we have to deal with. It is frustrating that the federal government hasn't yet passed a law to at least allow states to have access to what they need in order to ensure that the people that are working in these, quite frankly, aren't members of some drug cartel. So. And
we've spoken to Senator Leahy's office about this. We've spoken to the administration, including our partners over at the Department of Public Safety about this. Everyone is kind of aware of the status that we're in, but I do think it would be helpful for us to at least try to modify our definitions, not change them substantively, but to modify them so that they're slightly more specific.
So you're going to have language for us next week on that.
If we can get it by next week, we will certainly have it. We want to have our partners at the FBI put their eyes on it first. But honestly, if that doesn't happen in time, there's nothing we can do. But
at the end of this week, we'll have 2 weeks left in the session. So in our committee time, if we have some after that, we'll be lucky. But I'm planning to try to get every bill that we take up out by a week, 2 weeks from this Friday.
You could also, if you can't get the language by then, you could send it to us, because we're an afternoon committee, and we could just plug the language in.
Well, I don't know that you're gonna be meeting, but yes, that's it.
We're an afternoon committee, so we can.
That seems unfair.
Well, it's because nobody on our committee is on appropriations or finance, because they're afternoon committees, so that's it's not fair, but that's the way it works.
Things aren't fair.
Nobody said life was fair.
In fact, many people said it's not.
I'm sure you told your children that many times.
Yes.
Anyway, Pepper, the quicker the better.
Yeah.
There are alternatives, so.
Understood, thank you. And we'll make this, it has been a priority for us. We'll try and give the FBI some clear expectations as to when we can and cannot change this. So, your next witness really was here as in kind of a support role for me because he was so heavily involved in our advisory committee and our development of the rules. So I don't know if he has anything additional to say, but so I'm happy to take any more questions or I did have some data about the market if you're interested, or any sort of updates or questions you might have.
Well, when can we stop going to I don't use it. When can my constituents stop driving to Massachusetts and buy some
And giving them,
cannabis in Vermont?
giving Massachusetts all our money.
Well, so, these so-called integrated licenses are allowed to operate all 5 of their license types as soon as they're issued. We have to begin issuing licenses, including to the integrated, starting May 1st. So, we don't know whether or not these integrated licenses are all going to seek licenses or whether they're going to be ready to go on May 1st. But that's the soonest possible date that you could see a retail sale, a legal retail sale.
What are some of the biggest hurdles in opening up? Is it product? Is it government regulation? Is it towns who haven't opted in?
I can tell you that everything about this industry is complicated by the federal status. Getting a bank loan is impossible. We've seen some people get, one of the existing dispensaries was able to secure a loan for a vehicle because the dispensaries are allowed to do delivery. But as far as getting a bank loan to start an operation, that's not going to happen. Even getting a depository account to put your cash in is very challenging. Insurance, you have to go to these surplus line insurers and it's incredibly expensive. Towns, I can sympathize for the towns. This is brand new for them. They don't know what regulations they have, what control they have. We've put out a kind of 14-page FAQ document for towns. We recorded videos kind of responding to some of the most frequently asked questions for the towns. But, this industry to a certain extent is also regulated like any other industry where, you have to go through fire safety if you're going to be open to the public, and they don't have unlimited resources themselves. And everything is just brand new. So there are challenges ahead. And again, from a staffing point on our side, you guys have done, and I really appreciate your commitment to understanding the board's needs with respect to staffing. We're in the queue to hire the staff that we've been authorized, but it's still just the 4 of us at the cannabis board. And so we're really trying to kind of do as much as we can to help facilitate and answer people's questions and get these licenses out the door. But we really can't do that until we have our compliance team in place, our licensing team in place. I would just say also, because of the federal status, the entirety of the supply chain needs to develop in Vermont. You can't, for instance, ship, samples of the cannabis you've cultivated to Massachusetts for testing. It can't cross that state border. And so all of the testing facilities have to be, kind of brought online here in Vermont. And that's true of product manufacturers. There's no way for us to kind of say, the demand for cannabis is exceeding the amount that we've grown. Let's just bring in, 50 pounds from Massachusetts to kind of ease that tension. So, just developing the entire supply chain here in Vermont, I think, is going to be it's going to be bumpy. I mean, we've got, we're trying to kind of ease a lot of this tension. H548 does a lot to help ease a lot of these tensions in developing the supply chain. But, I just don't want everyone to expect, everyone that's listening to expect that, we can flip a switch and that everything is going to kind of go off without a hitch.
Are we the fastest state to go if we get there this summer?
No, other states have had just impossible, Oklahoma, they passed a law that said you have to start, they don't have adult use, they have medical, but you need to start medical in 60 days. So, other states have set impossible expectations, and really it's led to bad outcomes. Oklahoma, I hate to, put a spotlight on them, but they have an incredible problem, or they at least used to, with diversion, cannabis being grown legally and then sent out of state, because they had no compliance staff. They had 2 people, and they have 13,000 licensees. So, we have moved at an incredibly fast pace. Fortunately, everyone who's at the cannabis board knows the law very well, knows the expectation, has been involved in one way or the other in the conversations over the past, almost decade. And so we were very much able to hit the ground running. And the industry really is stepping up. I got to say that, I was going to give you some very brief numbers. We've set up this kind of pre-qualification process to clear people's backgrounds, to make sure that they're not categorically disqualified. They don't have something going on in their background, like ties to criminal organizations or something like that. And as of this morning, 581 individual entities have applied for licenses. And the vast majority on the cultivation side have been for those tier 1 cultivators, those small cultivators. 70% of the cultivation will be happening in these tier 1 small cultivators. And those people that is the illicit market, those tier 1 cultivators. So the kind of the plan, I guess, the intent of this legislation is starting to play out. The policy goals are starting to be achieved. We have license pre-qualification applications for every aspect of the supply chain. We have 8 for testing facilities. That's incredible. I think we're going to actually get up to maybe 10 or 11. We have, testing has always been the bottleneck. So to have 8 is a really good start. And then we have wholesalers and we have product manufacturers, which also have been kind of, bottlenecks historically in other states as well. So.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, Pepper? Pepper, so good to have you back in committee. Good to talk with you yesterday, and wish you all the best in this as you open up. And we'll be back to this bill next week, but I wonder if Carrie has any comments right now about the bill and some of the issues we just discussed.
Good morning, Senators, and thank you for the opportunity to comment, really. For the record, Carrie Jaguar, Vermont Agency of Agriculture. I'm the Director of Public Health and Ag Resource Management. The only thing I did want to add here is earlier this summer, when the Delta 8, Delta 10 hemp-derived psychoactive products were coming online, we did send a letter to our hemp producers and saying these were not considered hemp in Vermont. And I appreciate that this is in this legislation to move those psychoactive hemp-derived cannabinoids to a retail establishment that's not a gas station. We'll see them in the retail establishments that are selling other psychoactive cannabis products. And as the Agency of Ag, we do highly support that. And to be clear, you've heard testimony from me over the years that I believe that all cannabis belongs under one regulatory umbrella. And some of the language here, we will sort of amplify in S-188, but it puts the regulation of the consumer protection regulation of CBD products under the board. And like I said, we do support cannabis being regulated under one umbrella. And that's really the only part of the bill that the agency's here to speak to.
Any questions for Carrie?
No, just thanks for your patience and the information you've been giving us all for all these years.
Of course, of course.
So we'll take this up next week. I can't help but think, maybe this is more for Pepper, but I can't help but think we were just going over a bill a few months ago on firearms and the background checks. And 98% of them can be done in within 3 days. But we can't check the licenses for background record. There's something missing there.
Senator, we're seeing.
Maybe they should apply for a firearm purchase, even if they're not buying it, but they just get your background check.
Well, maybe they can open a gun shop too.
All of the states that have moved to a USDA certified hemp plan, and Vermont is one of them, also require that fingerprint and FBI background check, whereas our hemp program did not used to. The USDA plan does require that. So not only are the 16 states that Pepper had mentioned, but every state with a hemp plan is also bombarding the FBI with these fingerprint background checks. And we've run into the same bottleneck for our hemp growers and hemp producers as well.
So maybe next we'll require fingerprint and background checks for flax growers or barley growers. My God, think of what you could do with flax seed if you chewed them.
The devil's flax.
The devil's flax. Sorry about that.
I think it's about time to adjourn.